Hello, in this video we are going to cover the full process of setting up runtime virtual textures with the Aziel Arts material. The first thing you want to do is enable virtual texture support in your project. Let's go up to the Edit and Project Settings drop down and we will search for virtual texture. And we want to enable this virtual texture support. And right under it, there's an option here for enable virtual texture support on textures that you import automatically. I tend to like to turn this off because some textures I want to be virtual textures, some I don't. And this sometimes is annoying that will turn it automatically into a virtual texture on import. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for me, but that's up to you. And then we'll go ahead and restart our engine. So now that we've reopened the engine, we can go ahead and set up our virtual textures. First thing we want to do is go ahead and enable virtual textures in our landscape material. So we'll go and grab whatever instance we're using, and I'll double click on that to open it. Move it over here, and you can find the virtual texture enabling under the layer setup. And here we want to turn on use runtime virtual textures. This will have the material start sending its textures and looking for virtual texture volumes to get that picked up in. Next, we need to actually make those virtual texture volumes. So we'll go to our landscape here, and under the landscape virtual texture area, we want to go ahead and add our 2 virtual textures that come with the material that I've set up for you already to this input. So we'll go ahead and hit the plus button twice, and then we'll come over to our Aziel Arts material folders and open the RVT folder and open RVT textures. And we want to just drag in color and height. Once we've done this, we can hit this button to automatically create volumes over our landscape, and we can see they popped up here in the outliner. Next, let's go ahead and add an object in that we can test this on. So we'll go and hit the plus button here and just grab a simple shape. But you could obviously test this with a rock or some other object that you want to put into your world. I'll put it down like this, and we'll go ahead and add our material to this object. So in the RVT folder, I have an example material that you can apply to objects to test that this is working. If we open this up, all it really is a few textures, and more importantly, this material function here that you can just go ahead and add to any of your materials to get them to work with runtime virtual textures, which is located here under the RVT folder and material functions. Now this material function uses material attributes. So if your material looks like this, and you have your textures plugged in to a texture card in this format, all you'll need to do is to get it to work with this material function is to come over here to your material settings and choose use material attributes, which will collapse it down to this material input here that uses a packaged material input instead of a separate material channels. And then you'll just make a make material attribute node, which is basically the same as a material card, and you can go ahead and plug in your normal material into this. And then all we have to do is go ahead and put this material function in between these 2 nodes here. So I'll go ahead and hit save here, and I will come back to my example material and drag that onto the object. And this is a little hard to debug and test if it's working because of the grass. I'm going to come over to my material instance for the landscape and turn off the ground cover landscape grass option so we can see a little bit better. Now, here you can see the materials are starting to blend onto the object. Now the material instance will pick up on that function that you added and give you these parameters: blend fall off, blend height, and slope mask. Fall off is what it sounds like. It's the fall off of the actual materials onto your object. The height is, how far it comes up onto the object, and the slope mask is whether it masks out the edges of the object, the vertical areas of object, to receive those textures as well. Like that. So coming back to this object, one thing that I have noticed and something that you should be aware of when you're using virtual textures with this particular landscape material is that the way that the virtual texture volumes work, the ones we added automatically to our world, these 2, which are capturing both the material of the landscape and the height information so that we can blend it as a slope on slopey areas. But the issue is that it's capturing the landscape from a certain distance based on the distance that the volume is. And because our material is using a separate UV for distant and far textures, you can see that on this object here, We'll actually expand it to make it more obvious. You can see that this object is actually using the far version of the UVs because of the height that the virtual texture volume has to be. Now, we can try to mitigate this by taking our virtual texture volumes and shrinking them in the z-axis. And you can see if we lower them down just to above where the object is, it actually does get the correct size UVs, but this isn't always possible, especially in this example. We have, a high mountain, and so, you kind of do want the runtime virtual textures volumes to capture the entire area, including the tallest area in the mountain. And so there's a few ways to get around this. The one is to come to our actual material, our landscape material, and come over to our texture size. Now you can see we have a slightly different texture size for our far and near UVs. What we can do is we can switch our far UVs to be the same size as our close UVs. And when we do that, we can see that gets rid of our issue here. Since we have lots of different ways built into the material to break up textures, you can get away with not using this distance blending by having big UVs in the distance and small UVs close up. But sometimes you might need to still want to use that. So all we have to do is just kind of, if I return this back to the standard value here, we could also come to our distance and slope blending area in our material and come over to our distance blend fade offset. Now, if we go and push this to be further into the distance and push it far enough, it will actually encompass the runtime virtual texture volume distance. And so we will stick to our close textures up close, and we'll still have our far texture blending in the distance. It'll just be a little bit further. And we just want that distance into the far textures far away to be farther than the height of the runtime virtual texture volume, if that makes sense. A little bit annoying, but it's sort of the limitation of the volumes themselves, in that they capture the distance, the material from a very specific distance that they are in the world height. And so there's no way of really getting around that, using that and using the distance blending, unless we, like I said, have the distance be far enough so that it doesn't matter, or we use the same UV size both for close material, the close textures and the far textures. So hopefully that makes sense. Otherwise, this blending will work perfectly with whatever materials are under it, whether it's rock will blend on top of this object, or the grass, or if we have it over with the snow, it will blend as well. So super useful for blending rocks and natural as together. So just be aware of some of those pitfalls, and hopefully found this tutorial helpful, and I will see you in the next one.